Hello and welcome to A Book or Two to Review, number 12. This is another book of Ray Sturviant's. Now, normally when I'm talking about Ray Sturviant, you will see me get out those very big blue books I have up there and up there. The really massive specifications folders and all the other things, because that's what really is known. Squadrons of the Fleet Aeron, these are the big books. But he also produced this. British Naval Aviation, 1917 to 1990 by Ray Sturviant. And it's a lovely, lovely old book. Now, again, I've put up, as I always do with these books, and I put the ISBN and all the details I can, and a link, hopefully, to an Amazon procurement one down below. But the odds are this is an old book. If you're going to find it, you're going to be tracking it down on eBay or your friendly local second-hand bookstore. My copy is a former library copy, and I can tell that because it has the barcode and various other things in it. Now, this is a book full of pictures. This is a book full of facts. Plans. And let's see if I can get this lined up right with the light. There you go. Sorry. Got all the lights open today because it's very, very hot. You can tell it's the same date when I recorded the previous video. And it's chapters. Well, what library does this come from? Avon County Library. Thank you, County of Avon Library. It has 37 chapters. And my favourite begins on page 33. And is entitled The Phony War. It starts off with a picture of a swordfish. Across the way from a meteorological officer on board HMS Ark Royal in 1939, ready to track a Met Office meteorological balloon that had just been released by a rating. So basically the idea was you released the balloon up and it gave you an idea of the wind speed at various heights and altitudes by its angle. There you go. You can see the balloon now. I can do this. Turn away from the light. The first few months of the Second World War were known at the time as the Phony War. Action being very limited, the German army sat across the fortified Siegfried Line, whilst the French army faced it behind the Maginot Line. Supported by the British Expeditionary Force, RAF activity was generally limited to a few raids plus a lot of leaflet dropping. At sea, however, things were different. At that time, Ark Royal and Courageous were with the Home Fleet, whilst Furious was engaged in deck landing training in the Further Force. Argus was in reserve at Portsmouth, and Hermes had recently recommissioned following a refit. Glorious was serving with the Mediterranean Fleet, and Eagle with the Far East Fleet. In addition, the seaplane carrier Albatross was on its way to Sierra Leone with the walruses of the recently formed No. 710 Squadron, which would soon be carrying out anti-submarine patrols off the coast of the West Africa and protecting Allied shipping in the vicinity of the important refueling port of Freetown. The lessons of the earlier war had not been entirely forgotten, and to counteract the new U-boat menace, Courageous and Hermes were assigned to the northwestern west approaches, and Ark Royal to the southwest approaches. The war was only 11 days old, however, when Ark Royal was fortunate to survive a very near miss by the German submarine U-39. Courageous was less lucky, only 3 days later, on the 17th September, when she was hit by 3 torpedoes from U-29. 17 officers and 464 ratings being lost as she sank, and numbers 811 and 822 Swordfish squadrons being wiped out at a stroke. Okay, as you guessed it, the Royal Navy doesn't have any options other than to use the fleet carriers for the full sort of role because they're available. Argus is in reserve, as they say, and Hermes is only recently recommissioned, so they're both being worked up. But, and I say this strongly, Do not use your fleet carriers for anti-submarine warfare patrols. That's what escort carriers are for. On the credit side, the first fleet air arm success of the war was claimed on 26 September when Lieutenant B.S. McEwen, RN, in a skewer of No. 803 Squadron from Ark Royal, shot down one of three Dornier Du-18 flying boat shadowers over the North Sea. This was in fact the first German aircraft to be shot down by any of the British services during the Second World War. The fleet then made for Scapa Flow, but its position had already been reported, and at about 1400 hours, several Hankel HE-1 bombers arrived. Their main target was the carrier, and although one bomb dropped just ahead of the ship, her captain fortunately managed to steer her clear with only a shaking from the explosion. The pilot of the German aircraft, Adolphe Frank, claimed to have sunk the ship and was awarded the Iron Cross and promoted to Oberleutnant. His claim, though mistaken, was not unsupported, as German reconnaissance aircraft later came across two British cruisers, mistook them for the two battleships which had been accompanying the carrier, and assumed that as Ark Royal was not astern of them, she must have gone down. This was the first of many German claims to have sunk this new carrier. Commander R.A. Fillmore has vivid recollections of this event. My diary for the 31st of August 1939 records, in the afternoon we received three signals. 1. Raise steam with the utmost dispatch and report when ready for sea. 2. Fire is to be opened on any aircraft which cannot be identified. 3. All remaining shells and warheads are to be fused. Prepare for war. This is the last entry in my diary, for there were orders that in wartime no serving personnel were allowed to keep a diary. Some days after war had been declared, a small force of the Ark Royal repulsed Rodney, and a flotilla of destroyers was operating halfway between the Orkneys and Norway. A signal was received that a Hudson aircraft would be closing the fleet. The USA had recently made some Lockheed Hudsons available to Coastal Command, and most of us had never seen one. It duly appeared, low, down, and was passing some message by Aldi lights when we were aware that three aircraft were nearly vertical above us. One of them went into a near-vertical dive over the Ark Royal, dropped a bomb at about 1,000 feet, and made its getaway below the level of the tops of the masts, while all the close-range weapons of our force were trying to train quickly enough to fire at it and avoid hitting the other ships. Then, when it was near the horizon, it would climb again and stand by for another run. My action station was in the armoured tower, providing a front seat out the most spectacular display. My recollection is that the three aircraft attacked singly, each carrying out 3 runs. It was dramatic in the extreme, with the Ark Royal taking violent evasive action as soon as a plane was committed to a dive, with the Rodney and Repulse doing their best to conform. No hits were scored on either side, although Captain A.J. Power reported that the last bomb had broken crockery and taken off some paint of the ship's side of the Ark Royal. This is one of many times the Germans claimed to have sunk the Ark Royal, although certainly because shortly afterwards, with some destroyers left for Rosyth, while the rest of us returned to Scapa. Not seeing her, they thought they'd sunk her. In Mediterranean, things were rather quieter, as Lieutenant Commander A. Cannon recalls. During the summer of 1939, I was serving in No. 810 Squadron with Swordfish and was due for a move. To my surprise and great pleasure, I was appointed to the flagship of the West Indies Squadron, which I think was one of the town-class cruisers and carried a walrus. I was sent to Lyon-Solent to carry out a walrus conversion course. My instructor was Butch Judd, who had a fiery red beard and an even hotter temper. However, I succeeded in being converted to Walry, in spite of Butch trying to remove his control column in order to strike me over the head for not doing what he wanted me to do. I just completed the conversion course towards the end of August, when my appointment was cancelled and I was told to join Shropshire in the Mediterranean. But nobody knew where in the Mediterranean. I was eventually told to join the troopship Dorsetshire to proceed to Gibraltar. It was fairly obvious by then that war was inevitable, as one's departure was somewhat fraught and exciting. I was unmarried, so no worries in that direction. We duly arrived in Gibraltar on the 2nd of September. The next day, when the news came through, it was decided that the colour of the ship should be changed from white to grey before proceeding further east. This was done in record time by professionals and amateurs, and the ship sailed about 3 days later for Malta. We arrived safely in Grand Harbour, and still no sign of Shropshire, so I went to Alexandria. Shropshire at last arrived, and I duly joined along with the new executive officer, Peter Gornall, a well-known naval cricketer. Before the boat came alongside, I looked up at the walrus sitting on its catapult and realised that the next time I flew, I would be shot off that catapult at sea, having had only one previous experience, and that under dual control instruction. Shropshire had been ferrying British troops from Marseille to Alexandria, and having done several trips at high speed, had completely run out of booze in the wardroom. Fortunately, this defect was put right before we sailed for Cape Town through the Suez Canal. I found that my observer was Lieutenant Commander Jenks Harrison, who was considerably senior to me, I being then a junior two-striper. Jenks eyed me with considerable suspicion, as did most observers on getting a new pilot, and particularly one they had never heard of before. I gathered that Jenks had had some nasty moments with previous pilots, so quite naturally was apprehensive about the new one. As far as I can remember, we had practically no flying between the Suez and the Cape, as we were required at our destination as soon as possible. We then started on a novel routine of going to action stations every day at dawn. After a few days in Simonstown, we started on the job we had been sent to. This was to carry out patrols in the South Atlantic, primarily to try and intercept German ships which had taken refuge in the southwest African ports and were endeavouring to return to Germany. Our partner on these patrols was the Sussex, also carrying a walrus. Whenever it was suitable for a walrus to carry out a slick landing, Jenks, Thorogood, and I scourged the ocean for anything we could find. Jenks' navigation was superb, and we invariably sighted the ship after 3-hour patrols, exactly where he said we would. Sussex's walrus was not so lucky, and we spent 9.5 hours in one day looking for it without success, involving 3 launches and 3 slick landings. There were fairly numerous alarms when ships were reported as having sailed, but we never had the excitement of finding one. Our instructions on sighting an enemy merchant ship were to stop it by the usual method of shots across the bows and then prevent the crew abandoning ship or scuttling it. One day, to our surprise and pleasure, we found a ship which looked to be German. I dived down to a few hundred feet and Thorogood fired across the bow with a Vickers K gun. She was not much of a ship, 1 funnel midships, and the usual fore and aft castles on the Trampsina. Her name was Adolf Linhardt. She soon stopped, and her crew proceeded to man one of the only 2 lifeboats. To prevent this, we fired some shots near them, whereupon they all went to the boat on the other side of the ship. It takes a little time for a walrus to fly around to the other side, but we managed in time to loose off a few more rounds and send them back where they had come from. This game went on for a few more times until they eventually managed to get their boat in the water, followed by a second one. We reckoned it'd be a good hour before a shot rush arrived on the scene, so decided to board and capture the ship before she sank, as the crew had obviously opened the cocks. The sea was calm and only a low swell, so alighting on the water was no trouble. I taxied close to the boat falls, which were dangling in the water, and Thorogood made a jump for it and shinnied up the tackle with a white ensign under his arm. Great foresight on Jenks' part to carry a white ensign with us. Thorogood, the telegraphist air gunner, having hoisted the ensign above the Nazi flag, proceeded to see what was on board. He appeared on the upper deck and bombarded us with oranges and a framed picture of Hitler. Shropshire duly arrived and immediately sent a party of engineers on board to see if they could save the ship. Alas, it was too late. Our captive had been somewhat short-lived. Shropshire then stood off and gave the 8-inch guns some live practice, accompanied by some blistering comments from Captain A. W. Blissett, RN. The crew of the Adolf Linhardt were a fairly motley collection and included a dog and a monkey, all safely delivered to Cape Town at the end of the patrol. Early in October, Ark Royal was dispatched to the South Atlantic, her place in the Home Fleet being taken by Furious. The latter then sailed with the battlecruiser Repulse to afford cover for the first Canadian troop convoy from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Eventually, reaching the Clyde on 17th December, Ark Royal, meanwhile, had become a part of a new fleet codenamed Force K, which also comprised a battlecruiser Renown and a screen of 4 destroyers. For more about Force K, please see the videos I've done about Force K. Hermes was now operating out of Dakar with whilst Glorious was covering the Aden area and later the Indian Ocean. Apart from Furious, these carriers were largely engaged in the searching for German commerce raiders. In October, Swordfish from Ark Royal sighted the somewhat notorious Altmark, a supply vessel for the Potic battleship Graf Spee, but incorrectly identified her, and she got away on that occasion. Less lucky was the SS Unfels, when they were spotted a few weeks later, and was subsequently taken in prize by British destroyers. The loss of merchant shipping in the South Atlantic made it apparent that a surface raider was somewhere around, and Force K was well placed to search her out. Ark Royal Swordfish and Skewers carried out many patrols without success, but it was calculated that the enemy ship would at some stage have to put into Uruguay to refuel, and the cruisers Ajax, Achilles, and Exeter therefore sailed for the mouth of the River Plate to try to intercept her. First light on 30th December, they spotted Graf Spee, which immediately opened fire on them at a range of 10 miles. Now, this is one of the interesting points. As I've said before, imagine the difference in history if Ark Royal's aircraft had managed to track down the Graf Spee. Now, if they'd taken her out at sea, that would be a Bismarckian worth affair, but it also could have well meant that the Skewer, which would no doubt have been part of that strike from Ark Royal, would be far, far more famous and might well have had far more money put into its subsequent development. So might have received an upgraded engine and various other things, which might have turned it into an aircraft which would have been very useful in 41, 42, and then a replacement in 43, 44, 5. Who knows? The other option, of course, is they get to Montevideo, the carrier does, and they find the Graf Spee is still afloat and hasn't handed itself over. It's still resisting arrest and resisting in interment. As I said before, my strong suspicion is that the British would not want to have to maintain a ship they're constantly watching, and would consider that if what was the chances of Uruguay managing to force their opinion on the Graf Spee, they might well sink it in port and ask for forgiveness afterwards, in which case it would probably have been the skewers which had been used. After all, they're your dive bombers, they're your perfect tool for doing a precision strike, or as close to precision as you can do at that time. Again, that would be a very different history we'd be talking about. And I know, many of you like What If History, some of you don't like What If History. I like What If History mainly from the point of view of it allows me to examine the history. Because the fact that these things don't happen, it's interesting. It means this happens. It helps me look at the context of why decisions were made. Because there isn't a major incident. There isn't a major attack which captures the public imagination. I've written, of course, a book about the tribal class destroyers. Well, the tribal, the battle, and the daring class destroyers. All three wonderful class of ships. All three should be remembered. The tribals, the big incident which gets them in the public imagination is the Altmark incident that happens at the beginning of World War II. Imagine if it hadn't been a tribal class destroyer, it had been an Arethusa class cruiser or a J class destroyer which had gone in. Both potentially options. Arethusa would have had more difficulty maneuvering in that space, but honestly, would the Altmark have tried to duke it out with a light cruiser? Who knows? They are pretty motivated. J class, almost as big, almost as powerful, a more conventional destroyer in design, but very capable ship as a tribal. Again, who knows? The point is that would have changed history as we understand it. And it would have caused a different flurry of events. If the skewers got involved in a major naval operation that caught the public's imagination at the beginning of the war, so if they'd been involved in sinking the Graf Spee, then that would have probably set the fleet air arm up. And then when Taranto and various other things happened, the fleet air arm would have been even bigger. Taranto is considered the birth of the fleet air arm in many ways because that's when they come of age in the public's imagination. Because no matter what you think in terms of the reality of the value of the operation, how much they achieve, what they achieve measurably in terms of domestic public consumption is they achieve visibility. The fleet air arm suddenly is this group that is seen. They are known. People don't just think all pilots are the Royal Air Force. They suddenly think, oh, there's the fleet air arm, and what do they do? It's when it comes of age. The thing is, though, that's caught up with the Swordfish. And the Swordfish becomes an aircraft which just doesn't die in World War II, mainly because its successors are not that great, and then it does the secondary roles and auxiliary roles and escort carriers, etc. And the Swordfish is excellent for those roles, so they keep it going. But imagine if the Skewer has that moment earlier. Imagine if the Graf Spee. It's all an idea to ponder. Either way, very, very good book and well worth hunting down and getting yourself a copy. British Naval Aviation by Ray Sturviant. Hope you enjoyed, and if you do, please like, maybe subscribe. If you feel like supporting the channel and supporting research, then there's two options. There's Patreon, where you can join and suggest topics and vote, or you can join the channel and, well, you can suggest topics and then vote on which ones will actually get done in Patreon, or you can join the channel and you get access to some stills. All the slides still get put up on Patreon, but you get access to some stills and you get emojis that you can use in the chat. And it's a minimal amount, but it's because some people do not like funding through Patreon. So I set up the ability to join the channel, and I don't mind. I'm just so blown away by the fact that people are willing to support my research and willing to support my love of history. It's just amazing. Thank you, everyone who does it. Take care, and hope you enjoyed.